the worst news came literally last year at 30K. And like the best news comes out at like 60K, right? Like this has been happening. I've been in crypto for 5 years. This has happened every single time. Like, I mean, like for real, like this is just how it runs, right? Like the scary news, like, probably another week until we hear about Mount Gox FUD, right?
There's no floor, right? There really isn't. Like nobody is going to give a shit if this thing goes to zero from like a government perspective anywhere. Here's a great example, right? Like if house prices were to come off 30%, like the entirety of Congress would be like removed in like the next election cycle. There would be chaos, like sort of to like have that happen. We've survived these leveraging and deleveragings and these like moves in the market. It's still sort of what works, albeit there's some like bodies littered in the wake, but like it still is like really functioning, right? Like I don't know, there's something like very pure about that.
It's somewhat reassuring to know that no one's coming to save us and we're still doing okay.
Well, it's terrifying. I think it makes like people like really lose their marbles and like attack each other like on the lows.
Yeah, I think it does. But at the same time, like the fact that we've been through that, it's reassuring. We haven't needed it in the past.
But you've been through a couple.
Yeah, that's true.
The market, like sort of by definition, because it's been growing, like there's always going to be more people that haven't in this cycle than there were in the last.
Dan, Zaheer, thank you both for joining me. I don't think we should talk about crypto prices. Every single time we go up 1%, we just dump. So I figured it was best. Zaheer, you mentioned we should just talk about recipes. So I don't know what you guys have prepared, but I'm excited to talk about cooking.
Actually, it was Dan who mentioned
recipes.
I was
going to say...
I want to give him his fair credit.
Thank you.
Do you have something ready for us then? You said you've been preheating the oven. Is there a dish we're preparing?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's bear market. You gotta cook for yourself. You can't just be eating out all the time. You gotta learn your way around the kitchen.
That's true. I could respect that. I think Gainesy's the only person that his Uber Eats bill doesn't change, bull or bear market. He still orders like $100 a day.
Dude, that is an aggressive pace. I mean, power to you.
Got to get some of that exotic top ramen.
Yeah. Well, you just mix up the flavors. Like you go chicken one week, soy the next week. I don't know what else they have. Those are the only two flavors I have.
They have shrimp too. It's pretty good.
Like it's that little actual shrimp? Like
no,
flavor.
It's just like
okay.
Yeah, it's shrimp.
I'd be
shrimp stuff. It's like
super suspect of like seafood and
like
freeze dried package.
Oh, it's super good.
If we go lower, I'll try shrimp.
Gotta get used to it.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, it's bad. Even the scam replies on Twitter, it seems like, have stopped. I don't think they can make money from us. Dan, it looks like you are still getting scam texts though. Did you click on the link that you got text?
No, I got a lot of them though. I'm not even joking. I think I got like 25 to 50 of them in the course of like 48 hours. And it started Saturday morning and it's just been like nonstop. And they're all Coinbase and OpenSea. That's like every single one of them.
Did you put your phone number into something? Like how'd they get your number?
Not anything new. Like I don't know. I'm sure my number's in some services just from the years of like, I just assume my phone can get ported at any point, right? So like, I don't like, it doesn't matter a ton, but like, I don't know what I put it in that it got like hit, but it's like going off like crazy.
What if it's a real airdrop?
They're so bad though. It's not even an airdrop. It's like Ledger got hacked, so log in. And I'm like, well, first of all, like it doesn't even, it's not even like well thought out. Yeah. And then the other ones are like, yeah, like OpenSea airdrop, like log in now. Like I don't know. Like so they're pretty clearly like badly formed, but there's a lot of them. And they don't come from the short code things where it'll be like 2443 or like some like it's like actual phone numbers.
Did you ever like were you ever in the Ledger database leak?
Yeah, but it's actually it was my old address from like years ago that like got in it. So I was like this is actually like kind of like obviously like I told the people there I was like this was like known, but like it's like sort of like really good like counter intel. So like if somebody like you really want somebody to think you live there, right? Like that's like not a bad like outcome. But
yeah, to the North Koreans that are listening to this podcast,
yeah,
he still lives there.
No, yeah.
Feel bad for that guy who still lives there. He's probably still getting door knocks right now.
Well, he didn't like get it too. I was like, hey, listen, like my address was like compromised, like just letting you know. And he's like, doesn't get crypto. He doesn't even understand, right? Like it's just like such a weird thing to like try to convey to somebody.
Ugh. Down bad.
I got a bunch of those texts too yesterday. I think I got like 5 or 10. Same exact one, the Ledger one, the OpenSea one, the Coinbase one. I'm pretty sure it was the Ledger database leak. That's like the only common denominator because I don't think Coinbase or like OpenSea obviously doesn't store your information. and then like they have no access to your phone number.
Right.
And then it's like Coinbase, like we would know by now if there's a database leak.
I don't think I've ever put my phone number into Coinbase.
Yeah, I try to avoid that with any exchange, but
Yeah, like I always 2FA with Google Authenticator. Like I don't think there's been an exchange for a long time that made you use SMS.
So 2 years ago, Coinbase like didn't even have GAuth, like 2FA. They only had SMS. If I recall correctly.
Then I would have maybe, I don't know, dude. It's like feels like a lifetime ago.
All right. Well, if either of you are feeling bold, click on that link. If the airdrop's worth money, I'm willing to claim. I'm willing to claim. That's all I'm going to say. You know what's weird about the current landscape right now? Dan, we talked about this. Bitcoin and ETH haven't dropped as much as they normally do in a bear market, something like 85%. We're only at like down 60%, which is plenty. I'm not saying we need to go down more, but it feels like right now the sentiment is worse. It's like all-time high. I'm seeing more doom posts, people saying that this is going to last longer than it's ever lasted before. What do you guys make of that? What do you think is the takeaway there on why sentiment's so bad? And are all the bears right?
Well, I think it's because we didn't go up as much, right? Like, I mean, what is your multiple on the highs of like the last run, right? Like Bitcoin topped out, I don't know, call it 20K, right? So you got a 50% move off the highs of the last run that we're standing at, and you got ETH, I don't know, like maybe the double. Like, I don't know, it was like 1,200 traded, right?
Yep.
So maybe even less than that. So I don't know. I just think like if you look at it from that perspective, it's like it's kind of not a great run for sort of crypto. Like we didn't really plateau a lot higher than we were. And then alts obviously is like mixed bag of like just getting absolutely shattered. But like it's like I don't know. Like I mean, you look at Bitcoin, you're like that's like not a great run for. When was the high they put in? And I get you're like going from like the top to like another sort of like that's like the Pico sort of like level, but I don't know. That was like 2017 December or something like that. Like I don't know. It's 5 years going on. That's a lot of time. I don't know. I think when you look at it from that, like people get discouraged. I think people thought we'd go a lot higher before we took a retrace, like present company included.
Yeah, it's funny that you like asked us this question. You're not like probably talking to the two biggest bulls.
That's why I'm asking. I need some hope.
Yeah, I know. No. Yeah, no. I hear it. I think it's exactly the same thing that I would have mentioned. I think like we just didn't go that high. If you look at like 2017, we the previous all-time high in 2014 was like 1.4, 1.5K thereabouts. Right? It was 1.4, 1.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, low thousands.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you think about it, it was 2x off the previous all-time high was the bottom of 3K, right? Like you could use that kind of like logic and think that like, 30K is probably like pretty close to a relative bottom, right? Like you really don't want to go below the prior all-time high. Outside of anything other than like, people's confidence kind of gets shocked. So it's kind of like, CL's been posting this a lot lately too. I don't really see what people are kind of waiting for. Like in terms of like more death or more destruction. You probably had the single largest punctuated point of failure in crypto possibly ever, at least in terms of like size and like how many people it affected. So it's just like, I don't know what else is like capitulation, talk. But
I mean, I think the at least the theme of the macro threads that I read, it has a lot to do with this idea that liquidity lottery is done. That same trade, like the one trade, which has been every risk asset go up, is finally over. And because that's changed, now like this bear market should probably take longer than the other ones. The interesting part of that view is I've seen people make the case that like since that trade is over, it's now done forever. Like QE is never going to come back. Like federal banks, central banks aren't going to keep targeting inflation. Like it's in their mandate to target inflation. Money printing is always going to be a thing. We've already been in this now 6 months. It's like, am I missing something? I guess the question is, why are you two then, bulls when everyone else feels like they're bears? Like what are they wrong about?
Well, they haven't been wrong. Let's be honest. So let's just nip that.
I'm talking about future outlook, though. I'm talking about the people that are bearish now for the next 2 years. People are, making cases that this is going to take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, like outlandishly longer than it's ever taken in the past.
I mean, maybe it does. I mean, 2 years isn't that long a period of time, right? Like, it's not like, I don't know. Maybe I've been doing this a very long time. So like, maybe that just like numbs me a little bit to it. But like the fact that like Bitcoin still is at 30K is like kind of like a wild sort of thing in itself. like in general, like you still see like very large amounts of financing being raised. Like that will probably slow unless things turn around materially. But like still like more entrants into the system net, like year over year, maybe not month over month. Like I don't know, like the trend of crypto, I think, continues to be like up and to the right. Like I don't think that that's changed yet for me. So like I don't know, like yeah, like we're gonna get whipped around, like the larger like things going on in the economy gonna like fuck with it. Like yeah, like it's not in a vacuum. It hasn't been for a while. It probably never was. We just like didn't really have periods of this the same. So anyway, I don't know. Like I think that like that general thesis and trend remains. So that's why I don't know, still bullish for sure over the longer haul, but like probably been too bullish over the shorter run. But I don't know. I'm not gonna try to like time the tops.
I guess there's a case to be made that since we didn't have such a exceptional return period from our previous all-time high, like it didn't go as far as everyone expected. I don't think it was ridiculous when we were at 50K, 60K to assume we were going to go to 100K. Like everyone thought that, and I don't even think that was that crazy of a target. Even in hindsight that we didn't hit it, I still don't think it was that crazy of a target. Since we didn't go that high, is it fair to kind of assume, like, I don't know. I think most people are waiting for some massive capitulation. It feels like that just happened like a week or two ago. Z, what do you know, I'm not asking you to predict a bottom. I don't think that's helpful to really anyone. But like what does kind of structurally it look like for us, a bottom in Bitcoin and crypto?
I think it's just like I tweeted last night about like reading Robert Schiller and just like more like the psychological aspect of investing and trading. But I read a lot when I was in university, and it's like really beneficial because it's just like when you feel like everyone is like trying to squeeze through a door, right? Like a very small door, and there's like mass panic. That's like more capitulation than anything else, right? I think people have a tendency to over index on prior cycles and think like, oh, we have to have like this supremely bad market dislocation in order for it to be considered capitulation. It's like, no, our infrastructure across the board in crypto has gotten significantly better. There's probably like, 30, 40, 50 desks that can take a ton of risk. You can get like, you can trade OTC with anyone. You can get size on like any type of token. We're at a much better point than we ever have been. And it's like exponentially getting better in terms of like, at least since like 2017, like there's probably like 5 desks that were like doing size. Now there's like, like probably closer to 50. So I think all of these like internal plumbing, mechanisms are what insulate us from having like these really, really bad dislocation periods, right? Like, this whole idea that like, oh, we need another like, March 2020 type of like, complete market like meltdown is like pretty absurd. Simply because like we have that playbook. Like you don't, when something goes structurally wrong, you don't really like index on it like being, n-1 worse. You think that it's going to be like way worse in the future. So you start building the risk systems around for that period of time. And even as I say this, like we still had probably the worst case outcome, which was Luna completely blowing out and USD completely blowing out. More than $2 billion worth of Bitcoin being market sold essentially within a 48-hour time period. And like, there's contagion. Yeah, there's going to be like de-risking. There's going to be redemptions, that kind of thing. And it'll take time. But at the end of the day, it happened within like 72 hours. And like, that's never really happened in our market. So I think when you look at it in terms of like capitulation, it matters more like how many people were trying to get out of the door, right? And the two main things that I really look at are, number one, like, who has been absorbing this flow? And this is when people like kind of look towards the Finex longs. And number two, it's like more than anything else, it's like the loss of faith in all these pegs at once is kind of indicative that like there's not really anyone who's thinking like, oh, if price drops another 10%, I'm gonna have to like slam out of all risk. Like you had mass panic in a very, very small amount of time. You had people worried about Tether. You had people worried about like staked ETH, right? And like every single peg that could get like pushed around got pushed around. That shows me that like there's a lot of people who are very, very panicked. And that's like typically when you want to buy, right? And this isn't like to give out like a specific target in terms of like, when and where the bottom is, but like more often than not, that's your pipe dream, right? That's your like best case scenario.
Yep.
It truly is exceptional to think that we got rid of like $50 billion in market cap in like 72 hours, and things worked pretty well, across the board.
What do you make of Dan? We were talking a little bit before this call about way back 4 or 5 years ago, you trading on Bitfinex and there only being 1,000 Bitcoin of volume on some days. How bad things get during bear markets. What do you make of this Bitfinex buyer? Like the longs have gone parabolic. Like, do you guys ever look at that? I see some people point to this and they're like, "There's a massive Bitfinex buyer, or the Bitfinex guy is short." Like, why is there some giant entity that uses Bitfinex and it seems like is always building a massive directional bet? Like, is there any alpha in looking at what they're doing?
It might not be a directional bet, I guess, would be like my first caveat. Like, it might be paired off with something, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that like somebody's like taking that much like risk on, right? Like, it could be sold away, like, for sure. Like, I don't know entirely what is going on there, but like it's definitely possible that like that's like it could be like completely delta neutral. But I guess like the thing with Bitfinex that like I think shocks people is there's like a lot of deep money on that thing that like is like very old crypto money and can like come in and like do a lot of size, and like we see that like from time to time. I think it's just like part of the legacy, and like also it's like attached to Asia still, like, and there's some like just pockets of liquidity that like we don't think about here in particular that like come out over there. So I think those things going on. That being said, like, I mean, we look at it, but like, I don't know, like, I get that there's like a lot of evidence to say that like, oh, when these like things like get put on, like they tend to work out really well for like sort of the people on it. But like also sometimes the positions just get like closed, like meaning like people will just like, because on Bitfinex you can just like you can just take the position, right? Like you can just like put the cash in and like unwind it that way. Like they get closed sometimes just like naturally. Like, so it's like, it's also just happened in the past where like somebody like wind up some margin thing and then like later they just like sort of close out of it, probably because they've got it paired off somewhere else with something, right? So they just like unwind the arb that way. So we like look at it. I don't put a ton of stock in it like as like a directional sort of component, but it's like it's relevant for sure. And like it's big, especially in the context of like OI like everywhere else now. Like Bitfinex had like sort of like lowered in relevancy like over the years as like the derivatives platforms got bigger, but like this is like obviously a time where like that number is like a little more material.
Whoever's doing it, it's incredible psyops, because whenever they do it, it feels like it's the biggest position out of any exchange, and it's like they do it at the most extreme times. Like they have to enjoy just watching us try to figure out what the fuck's happening.
They definitely do. They're definitely out there like watching it.
It's crazy. All right, I want to dive into some of the specifics happening right now and how you guys think these play out. Right now, obviously, the Fed, S&P correlations, it's all one trade that's going down. It used to be one trade that was going up. Now, for the past 6 months, everything's been moving down. Even on days that we decouple and stocks kind of go up, it's like the decoupling has hurt us. Bitcoin keeps going down. Z, you tweeted out that the longer that Bitcoin is stuck in this correlation, the more it hurts us, the longer it'll take us to get back to normal. I'm kind of curious if Bitcoin's reached a certain size that this just always exists. Like, is there a case to be made that Bitcoin's just always going to trade pretty in line with stocks? Or is that kind of just me being too recent, having too much of a recency bias?
I don't think it will. I think it was Tracy Alloway who said like Bitcoin's the best asset in the world because it can be anything you want it to be. And I think for now, and probably for the last 6 months, it's been a risk asset. Bill Miller views Bitcoin as a inflation hedge, or just like a hedge in your portfolio that you need to own, or like a value buy. So it's like it can suit all of those things. It's still way too early and way too young to determine like what it will be in the future. My tweet was more so to say that like I think the more people that throw in the towel, the worse it gets in terms of wanting to participate in crypto. And so the longer it takes, the worse it kind of reflexively will become in the long run. In the short run. I don't think in the long run it matters. Like I think if you get like Nasdaq, moving down 3 days and Bitcoin moving up 3 days, then everyone will be like, oh, it's the end of the correlation, right? We have like goldfish memories in crypto. So it doesn't really matter all that much. I was just mentioning more so like you can tell like people, everyone is putting out a thread on like how to survive the bear market, how to do this, how to do that, right? And like the number one key theme has been like, oh, let's draw comparisons to like risk assets and like 1980s and the Nikkei, and then like the 2000 .com bubble. It's just like, I don't know, like it seems kind of absurd to put all these parallels and like think like, oh, it's definitively going to be the same. But people can meme things into existence. I don't know. I just have a hard time believing that like anything we do today will like really stick all that much. There was a point in time, I think in 2021, I think probably almost 9 months. No one really talked about it, but we were literally trading 1-to-1 with 10-year rates. Like the higher the 10-year went, the higher we went. So it's kind of like we can figure out a means to determine like what exactly and it's funny. It's like now where it's like the opposite, right? Like the higher the 10-year goes, the lower Bitcoin goes, right? So we have a pretty broken like heuristic around like how long these things take. So it's just like I don't really try. I try not to pay attention to it too much. And then it's also like it's I talk to Dan about this like pretty often. It's just like figuring out what exactly is going on with like the rest of the economy is just like one of the most difficult things in the world, because like, no one knows. No one has a clue. Like one day one metric is important, the next day it's not, right? And like determining that for like a million metrics in a million places and figuring out what really matters and what sticks is like really difficult.
If your like thesis is like, all right, like, I want to predict what like equity markets are going to do, so then I can trade crypto, like that is a hard sell for me. First off, like, why wouldn't you just do the trading of the equity thing? But also just like that is a very hard task to do. That like you could even make the argument like nobody like is really that good at like trading global sort of equity indices besides like a handful of people that have a track record over many times. So anyway, I don't know, like that's where I go like, I don't know, like probably not a good exercise for you.
All right, I also want to talk a little bit about Luna. We won't cover it too much. It's been memed into eternity. But what happened in the past week, it usually takes like a year, right? Layer ones that evaporate. We've seen this before. We've had Tron, EOS, all these layer ones in the past that kind of go away. Usually it takes like 12 months. Luna evaporated in like 2 days. I'm kind of curious when things do come back, whether or not this really hurts the ETH killer narrative. Because, and the reason I'm asking is there's an interesting dynamic where Solana, it feels like for the first time in a long time, actually has good momentum. On the NFT side, people love Solana NFTs. I think they make a lot more sense to trade than ETH NFTs, and the prices are going up. That's a great marketing thing for Solana. They also have STEPN, which is like the most used app, and people can hate on it all they want, say it's a Ponzi, but people fucking love walking to earn. Like, it makes them money. They love the game. It's simple. Normies get it. There's like good momentum for Solana. At the same time that's happening, we have Luna, which just got wiped off the map, and I'm curious what you guys think about when things do return, when the hot ball of money starts to warm back up. Is it tougher for Solana to compete? Like, what is the ETH layer one narrative gone? Like, that was such an obvious trade last year. Is it going to be harder to kick that back up?
I think the biggest problem is like there's a lot of crossover of ownership between like Luna and like the other L1s, right? Like that's like in the short term, like you had a lot of people have to like probably raise capital and like sort of like de-risk because of like getting kicked in the teeth so hard with Luna that like Solana AVAX definitely got sold as like a function of that, right? Like I assume a lot of things just got like sold, like Bitcoin and ETH as well, but like those two like probably uniquely had the like highest crossover of like ownership, I think, especially like at the retail level, because it was like such a thing, right? Like it was named for all of last year, right? Like there was definitely people that just like own that basket. So I think that's like the short term sort of problem with it. I don't know, like I'm of the opinion that like the most bullish thing for the ETH like alternative L1s is like all of the block space being used on ETH, right? And then it spills over elsewhere, and like that's like sort of like the high octane like bet on top of like that. But if we're in this period where like there's not a lot going on even on ETH, and like gas is low and like there's not a demand for like block space outside, like they're going to suffer sort of the same thesis. Like I think they're going to trade together and like going forward. Like I don't think there's going to be like this big separation. Like that's my thesis on it. So like I don't know, like you're probably still dealing with the fallout of that, of just like there's just a lot of people not necessarily participating in the market right now. So like there's just not a lot going on ETH, and there's like probably not a lot of demand outside of sort of block space on AVAX and Sol. So I think like that's like the bigger trend on. I don't think you're gonna have a ton of like this like sort of fighting of like, oh, like you should be long ETH and like short Sol, like that's like the trade or whatever. Like I think that's like less relevant than like just the aggregate sort of demand for like smart contract space.
What about Justin Sun kicking up this Tron trade? He's probably the only person crazy enough in crypto that after something collapses, he wants to copy it and try it himself. And it looks like he's kind of pulling it off, at least for right now. At least for right now, like Tron's actually doing well. It's not saying much because everything else is down or flat. But like, is it worth actually looking at Tron, or is this like a game of chicken that now people know the outcome? Like, how do you think this Tron stablecoin yield Ponzi incentive game plays out?
Well, it's much more collateralized, right? And it's also like backed by Justin a little bit. I don't know. I'm actually not super in the weeds on it.
Okay.
But like my general take is like it's like risk profile is a lot lower.
There's some difference of mechanics behind it, as far as I know. Like it's not in the same way that that UST and Luna, were kind of created. I wanted to add also, like I think like, Luke, I think you mentioned something along the lines of we've seen this ETH killer narrative in the past. I was thinking about this today. I think one of the big differences is just, and maybe this is an explanation to the earlier question too, which is like, Bitcoin didn't go up as much as it should have, right? This is the first time in history we've ever had, in crypto's history, we've ever had, other coins outside of Ethereum and Bitcoin be worth something in a real way, right? And have like real liquidity and real people and real teams and real ecosystems, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, and if you want to kind of drop the comparison to like EOS or Neo or whatever else, right? Like those communities didn't really exist, right? Like,
right.
The narrative was that these things could become what ETH is, right? But ETH wasn't even a thing in 2017, right? There's no real applications on top of ETH back then, right? We had we had Tether on Bitcoin OmniLayer, right, for the longest time, right? Like it wasn't until like I think 2018 or 2017 that Tether really started making a push on ETH and then Tron as well. So I think I just wanted to caveat and say that like overall, it's a very new thing for us to have more than two assets that are worth something. I do agree with Dan that like this is, a lot of the reason why these things went up was because of how badly or how much demand there was for ETH essentially, and then that kind of just spilled over. But at the end of the day, like AVAX and Solana are worth something. They're not zero like EOS, and they'll keep their name. They'll be around. I think it'll be interesting for them to kind of for these ecosystems to really see why ETH is so special, in the sense that like in 2018 when like the dust settled and ETH like went from like 1,400 down to like $80, the community didn't bail on ETH. And so now it's like kind of a challenge to these other ecosystems, and I think they'll succeed. But it's like, do you really believe in the underlying, base layer for your protocol? And if so, like you'll build in any condition.
Yep.
And then that's what the ETH crowd did, and that's why it's so sticky now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it is going into the merge. I mean, I think a lot of people think that ETH's price will be higher at merge, but we're still in this game of like, I'm just gonna keep waiting. I'll buy lower. Dan, you tweeted out, this is a while back, this was before things crashed, and you were kind of saying, look, the merge is coming. Don't fuck this up. You have enough ETH. Don't trade. And I imagine there's a lot of people that have tried to get fancy now, maybe have less ETH than they had at the beginning of the year. What do you think about the ETH merge? Like during bear markets and when things are this bad, people kind of have a tendency to forget of the good things that can come. ETH merge, I think, is undeniably going to be positive, but is it a non-event if things don't get prettier? Like, how do you guys think of the ETH merge and its effect?
I think the problem, I also like still think that's like probably the best like advice you can just like give somebody. Like, but I mean, obviously it's down, but like my point more or less is like if you had levered up, you'd be dead.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's still good advice. I'm not hating on the advice. I'm saying like I think it's still valuable, but what's going to happen to price?
Yeah, the issue is like, so let me give two scenarios. Like the biggest problem is there's like a shit ton of uncertainty, like ignore crypto, like financial markets, like broad in the next like 2 or 3 months. Like, I mean, you see this like playing out in the equity market, right? but more even specifically in the fixed income markets. So anyway, like that's like a really big like hole of like unknown that like you sort of have to like keep a position through, which I think is like obviously like deterring like a ton of like risk taking for sort of that like trade. But like, and there's the issue of like, all right, like when's it really landing? And like we're getting more sort of confidence of like when that more looks like. I mean, like the latest I hear is like September. I think like Zim, I know much better on like what the exact timeline is. But anyway, like I think as it gets like closer, that like trade will become like a lot more aggressive, like a lot faster. You also like potentially have a world, and this is like to give all the bulls a little like hope here, where like you see the Fed like finally like pulling back on rates at like sort of the same time like the merge like potentially goes through, which would be like quite a little like nice like pairing if it happens. But this is like a big if, right? Like I don't like there's nobody knows what the heck's going on there. But there is like, I mean, there was a comments today sort of like along those like same lines where like we made like sort of slow things by September. So I don't know. I think that's like sort of what I think 3 months is like an eternity right now for people in like macro, and that's causing the same like waiting in crypto.
It's so funny. It's like this year and last year are the exact same setup, like to the T. Like May, we just like destroyed like 80% of like alt value, like AVAX and Sol were trading basically worthless for a while. And ETH had EIP 1559, right around the corner, and everyone I knew was just like, oh, it's either a non-event and or it's not happening. Like miners are never going to go for this. People are never going to go for this. And it seems like the exact same setup, right? Where it's like Sol and AVAX are worthless. Macro is uncertain. We had like a humongous event. Like we really downplay how bad the China stuff was. Like I had a call with Dan last year. Like I'll never forget this call. And it was probably the first time I heard him like actually in some way just be like, yeah, it's not good. Like it
wasn't good.
It's just, yeah, it really was, because it really wasn't, right? Like it's remarkable how quickly we came off that. Like you could argue it was worse than Luna and UST. But I think it's like the exact same setup. Like people are goldfish, right? Like they're like 2 weeks or a month before the merge, you could probably see ETH BTC just absolutely rip up. In a way that like like the same thing happened with EIP 1559. Like you can post a link to the chart even. Like it's literally the exact same setup. Like I think we went up like 30% in like 2 weeks against like Bitcoin. So I think we have a pretty similar setup. I think the longer end of when it could happen, from what I understand, is towards the tail end of 2022. I think devs are really, really trying to push it before 2023 because I think like enthusiasm is just going to like completely collapse if it takes like another 6 months after that. So that's as far as I know. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, is Ethereum actually being developed, right? Like if you want to understand like why it's so bullish, right? It's like it doesn't have to make sense in an economics point of view. It's just like, is this thing really evolving into its like next layer? Someone made a pretty decent analogy. It's like Ethereum, like going with the merge is basically like two like supersonic planes trying to refuel each other like mid-flight, like over a battlefield. It's like pretty true, right? It's like pretty accurate. Like it's really hard, and it would be a really large milestone that's been like 5-6 years in the making.
Yeah, I feel like I've been hearing about this ever since I've been in crypto 2 or 3 years ago, and it's always just been an event that we push off. Well, maybe it actually happens this September. I don't know.
But I remember I'm talking about it in like 2017. Like
that's what I mean.
Like,
yeah,
it's been going on forever.
I remember.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I remember this in 2017. Yeah. It was a very exciting time.
Back then though, everything was smaller. It was like we would run up for 20 or 30%, it would sell off, and like people actually just viewed it as a trade, like as a 1 month trade. No one actually thought it was going to happen after a while.
That's because ETH wasn't a thing. Like that's what a lot of people in like the post 2019 2020 crowd don't understand. It's just like there was Bitcoin and then there's nothing else, and if you like really wanted to be a degenerate, you'd buy ETH
to chuck into ICOs. But that was it.
Right. And even like holding it outright was kind of like insane. I remember I longed ETH USD on BitMEX in 2019, and it was just like I was so afraid of like buying this thing because I was like, this thing just trades at like a ridiculous fall. Yeah, like people don't realize like ETH wasn't a thing until like 2020, where you could own it in your portfolio and like go to sleep at night. No, I'm not worried that it would have in value.
Well, and like in 2017, like there'd be like a large ICO, and like the network would stop working for 2 days. Which is like, look, I'm not like, obviously like we have like been pretty vocal and involved in Solana, but like there's a lot of like mud that gets thrown at it when it like goes down and they restart and all that jazz, right? Which is fair, and there should be like criticism of that. But like I just very much remember like ETH being hosed for like 2 to 3 days at a time. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm still waiting for like my status ICO transaction to like clear. And like, oh, I can't use my wallet. Like it's just like ridiculous shit like that. Or the exchanges would just like shut it off for like a couple of days because they'd be like, yeah, like the transactions are clogged, like we can't use it. I'd be like, all right, like there's like growing pains and like and not look, everyone should do better. Like I'm not trying to, but like we very like that is like a very goldfish memory thing. Like I get 2017 is 5 years ago now, but like it's not that long.
It's funny. It's like even back then, like yeah, like ETH had those problems, but Bitcoin also had those problems. Like I remember, like I haven't seen a Bitcoin mempool photo like of the chart in like 3 years, right? Because nobody uses the Bitcoin network anymore, in a real way. And like back in like 2018, 2019, like you'd be like, oh no, like my transaction can't go through for like 2 days because like the mempool is completely clogged.
Dude, it used to be so bad on the desk because like people would send us, we were like net buyers of a lot of coin, right? So like people would sell us coin and we would like, and then they would put like the just garbage fee on it. And I'd have to keep looking at this transaction for like 2 days, being like, oh, did it land yet? Oh, did it land yet? And you have like 50 of them that you were keeping track of at like high times. I spent so much time on blockchain.info just like refreshing. Like it was a huge part of my life, and I don't do it at all anymore, which is like wild. Yeah. But like I would just sit there and be like, oh, did it confirm? Oh, did it confirm? Like, oh, like were the fees enough? And that was like always a problem, is like you couldn't fix it once it had been sent. So you're like, oh, now I'm stuck for like 2 days until there was like some like weird overnight window from like 2 to 3 a.m. where like the fees would get cheap. Yeah, it was, oh man, so much of that time, especially when Tether was on it too. Like I don't know if you remember this, but the only reason we got off Omni was because CZ finally decided that he wanted like ERC20 on Binance. That was the only thing that changed it. Like it didn't matter. Like if he hadn't moved over, we would still be whipping around Omni.
I remember those Bitcoin days. I feel like I actually sent money to, I don't know to this day if it was a scam or if it actually sped up my transaction, but I was trying to send Bitcoin to an exchange, and I remember like the deposit wouldn't go through. I had to put more margin down. Hypothetically, I was trading on an exchange that you could use margin, and the transaction wasn't going through. And I remember like Googling, I was like, it's been like 2 fucking days. Like, how do I speed this up? And there was a site that said, if you send it to this thing, it somehow bumped. And I think I sent Bitcoin to that too. And my transaction went through, but I don't know if I got scammed or what was the deal there.
The mining pools used to run them. They were like the accelerators. Yeah, no, that was real. Yeah. So like you could pay the pool to like basically like put your
speed
thing
up.
In.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they ran some of them for free too. But like, yeah, that was like very much a thing.
We used to imagine having to deal with this now.
Dude, it was a lot of my time at Circle because like we had a big issue where not to get into like the nitty gritty of like the change in Bitcoin, right? Like it can become an issue if you've got like thousands of transactions going a day. And like you need so what we would do is we would like bucket the outputs in like sizing so that we like could have pieces that we would like grab to like do anything. But like if we were just like a really busy time and like we had like run out of Bitcoin and we had to settle something large, we would use like hundreds of buckets and we would just like take everything. And I remember this to this day. I paid a $1,500 transaction fee to send Bitcoin once to a guy because like we'd used so many unspent outputs and like the fees had gotten so bad. And I remember just being like, this is like all we made on this trade. I was like, this is just so ridiculous. Like this is just like not like this is just not worth my time. But yeah, like I spent a lot of time like optimizing buckets and like figuring out what transaction fees should be. That feels like a lifetime ago.
Talking now about stablecoins and Bitcoin, you had an interesting thought about some people have compared ETH, it being a threat to Bitcoin in terms of store of value. The ETH maxis love to call it ultrasound money. You said one of the bigger threats to Bitcoin is actually stablecoins and the rise of stablecoins. What do you mean by that? Since we were just talking about stablecoins, like what is that rise, and why is that the real threat instead of ETH?
Yeah, funny. This is a call I had with Dan like 2-3 weeks ago. But it was basically this idea that like, the number one use case we like, and the same reason why we don't use the Bitcoin layer, like Bitcoin, layer essentially today. It's because of stablecoins. We don't use, the Bitcoin network as a whole because we have stablecoins now. Like back in the day, if you wanted to trade some alt or wanted to trade on an exchange, it was either you sent it to a certain derivatives exchange, or you send it to Binance, and you trade Bitcoin, right? And now every single exchange, the largest contracts are USDT or USDC denominated. This isn't like really a surprise. Stablecoins are much better at pricing than trading against Bitcoin pairs. But like I remember even up until like 2019 or 2020, like on BitMEX, the ETH BTC contract had a ton of value on it, right? Like there's a lot of open interest on it. Did a lot of volume. And the main reason being, it's like people wanted to trade the assets against Bitcoin. And then once stablecoins kind of came around and like, people could price it against dollars, right? Then like this kind of changed the game, like forever basically. And Bitcoin went from being something that was actively used, every single day to move money around or be able to trade on a different exchange, to now that function being ETH on, in a decentralized manner, but stablecoins being used on top of ETH, to move between like, Binance or Coinbase or, what have you. And it just makes, it's basically like, what is the grease that kind of keeps the wheels moving in crypto? It used to be Bitcoin and now it's stablecoins. And they basically took away one of the main sort of use cases of Bitcoin in its earliest days.
Does that hurt Bitcoin long term? Like, does Bitcoin need anything? Going back to those doomer threads, I've seen people say nation states aren't adopting it anymore. Corporations aren't adding it to the balance sheet. Now you have stablecoins kind of eating into one of Bitcoin's old use cases. Like when things return, I kind of think once the Fed flips, we're right back to hot ball of money. Bitcoin solves all its own problems just like that. Does Bitcoin need anything to pull out of this other than the Fed?
No, I don't think so. I don't think like its use case was taken away. I think you should really think about it more as like it was a use case that existed because of like an imperfect system that like Bitcoin had found a role for that it just like sort of bounced out of. Like it never should have been for that. It was just like
Right.
it was like a placeholder. And like it was a shitty one. So like once like a better one came along, it just like swapped back out. But like it really had nothing to do with like the core value prop of like Bitcoin. It just like happened to like be what we needed at that point in time. So like I don't know. Like I don't think it like really materially like degrades like its like long-term pitch. Like it still functions exactly perfect. Like I mean, that and on like the corporate balance sheet side, like that never really like was a thing. Like I mean like obviously Saylor took it like all the way, but like and Elon did like a slug, but like I don't really think there was like a lot of inertia on that. It never felt like it to me. It like it's the same reason like corporate treasuries don't hold any risk assets if they can avoid it.
Right.
Like it never like really like made sense to me like why they would want to hold this thing.
Maybe I got to stop reading those doomer threads, man. They're popping up too much.
The idea that suddenly like state like wealth funds aren't like buying it because of like they weren't anyway. I don't think they.
Yeah.
It's been very retail and high net worth individual for like a while.
I guess like you can even like flip it on its head and think like that's a bullish outcome, right? Because it's like there was no corporate treasury that was really buying Bitcoin, and there was no like real sovereign wealth fund that was buying Bitcoin in size. And so it's like if those two things are theoretically still on the table, then it's like a more bullish outcome than saying that like no one's doing this ever again. I think people over-index on how smart, quote unquote, smart money is. People, at the end of the day, everyone's like trying to appease their bosses. And like, if you work at like a pension fund or an endowment or like a sovereign wealth fund, like you don't really have the opportunity to go out and be like, oh, we should hold X amount of money in, Y asset, right? It's like that doesn't really happen. You basically get like a de-risk, handbook on what exactly you're supposed to be investing in. And that's about it. Like people don't really get creative with it. I think David Swenson's probably the most notable pension guy out there. or sorry, endowment guy out there, and like even his like portfolio was like pretty like vanilla. It wasn't anything like exotic, and that probably continues for a very long time. Like I think you need more structural kind of changes, right? Like the Fidelity 401k thing is a lot bigger deal than people really want to put stake into. If that ends up actually materially happening, it's just like basically, can you change the foundational pieces of these investment buckets that exist today, right? Like a decade ago, people, or maybe a decade and a half ago, people didn't really put money in NASDAQ. It was like Dow Jones and S&P, right? Nowadays, NASDAQ is like, the second hottest thing out there. Dow Jones is like kind of a meme. It very much
Tell it to my
functions
dad.
right. Well, I mean, it's the truth, right? Like people love like the comparisons to NASDAQ, right? Like, and these things kind of just change over time. Like I think even with the doomer posts, right? Like, more than anything, like emotions run so hot in crypto because there's no clear understanding of what exactly any of this stuff means. Like it's like the best abstraction of like value in traditional markets. The only difference is like in crypto we tear each other apart because there's like zero history behind any asset outside of like maybe Bitcoin. And then in equities, you can kind of just be like, oh, like this goes up into the right forever because that's how our societies run.
Right.
And that's like why people don't eat each other. I think like eventually Bitcoin and ETH will get there, but it's like the more you read into this stuff, like the more you're just going to be like, this is the dumbest thing possible. I remember like the worst news came literally last year at 30K, right? And like the best news comes out at like 60K, right? Like this has been happening. I've been in crypto for 5 years. This has happened every single time, forever, right? Like the scary news, like probably another week until we hear about Mount Gox FUD, right? Like, I mean, like for real, like this is just how it runs, right? Like it's like, oh guys, it'll be really bad this time. Like serious, for real, trust. What are we talking about?
It's a good point. Like I think crypto is also unique in the asset class. Just getting to what Z was saying about how like equity just had this assumption of like up and to the right, and like we kind of have formed society that like we kind of do need that to happen. Like crypto has there's no floor, right? Like there really isn't. Like nobody is going to give a shit if this thing goes to zero from like a government perspective anywhere, right? Like all right, like here's a great example, right? Like if house prices were to come off 30%, like the entirety of Congress would be like removed in like the next election cycle, and it would get fixed, right? Like it just like wouldn't be accepted, and there would be chaos, like sort of to like have that happen. And like equities, same way, right? Like equities are like considered riskier, so like there's allowed some like, but if there's like a material like degradation and like you start destroying everyone's wealth in the country via that mechanism, like the government will do something. Like it's just like 100%. Like there's like a point where they like have to like act. Like that doesn't exist in crypto. Like it could go like, and we know that, right? Like we know that there's no point that like nobody like is ever going to sort of like get in. And I say this a lot, like, or I try to make a point of saying it after we do have like a big market dislocation where I'm like, the governments are like always saying that this is a systemic risk, but it's very good at policing itself thus far, right? Like, and it has to, because like there's not going to be sort of anything else. So like we've survived these leveraging and deleveragings and these like moves in the market, and like it's still sort of all works. Like everything, like albeit there's some like bodies littered in the wake, but like it still is like really functioning, right? Like I don't know, there's something like very pure about that.
It's somewhat reassuring to know that no one's coming to save us, and we're still doing okay.
Well, it's terrifying. I think it makes like people like really lose their marbles and like attack each other like on the lows.
Yeah, I think it does, but at the same time, like the fact that we've been through that, it's reassuring. Like we haven't needed it in the past.
But you've been through a couple.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of the market, like sort of by definition, because it's been growing, like there's always going to be more people that haven't in this cycle than there were in the last, right? So like I think you got to take that with it. Like there's definitely, like everybody remembers it, right? Like there's always a point where you're like, this probably isn't going to work out, right? Like it happens. Like everybody's got it in crypto.
I think even there's a lot of new people who came in after 2020, and like I just love when they like comment on some sort of historical basis of like how crypto works, because I know like when I was in 2018 and 2019, I used to think like, oh, like this is just like significantly worse than what could have happened in the past. And then like I, have a conversation with Dan, and he was basically like, yeah, like we were like 48 hours before like, the whole thing might have just went to zero. Because like, we're just so much better off than we were in the past. And like this shit that like we think is very new or, very one-off, or like this is the first time it's ever happened. Like, no, it's just like, as soon as you think this is the first time something this bad has happened, it's like that. So that's like already like a pretty like incorrect, like, kind of assumption to make. And I think like, to Dan's point, like, with like equities or home values or whatever, it's like, it's in the same way that like, it's a national security issue, right? Like, and even so far as to say that like, Nasdaq's dropped 20% from its highs, like actually more, almost 30% from its highs. Like, the Fed is already signaling, quote unquote, like, pumping the brakes a bit, right? You had like 4 members of the Fed today basically say like, hey, like maybe we can think about, pumping the brakes in September, right? And part of it is like, you can't just let this stuff go to zero, unfortunately, right? Like, you can't let like global markets go to zero. It's very much tied to like, people's ability to eat food, right? Or like, like I think a lot of people really forget like how bad it gets in other countries outside of the US, right? Like when you have like problems in the US, like, yeah, it's bad. But like when you extend it out to like other countries, like look at Sri Lanka right now, like that's a complete economic disaster, right? Like, and it always hits these other countries first, right? So it's like there's a reason why like it's much bigger than just like, oh, like, let S&P go to 2000 or whatever, right? Like, yeah, it's just like really like it can't happen in the same way. Like we haven't even had like any form of QT, and like people are already like wanting to pump the brakes because of like, how reflexive our markets kind of are.
Well, also September is not random, right? Like, what do you got on the back of that? You got a midterm election. Like, this is like getting to the point, right? Like how angry are people right now? Like, you take another 15-20% off everything. Like, how much angry are they going to be?
I can't even imagine, dude. I honestly can't.
And like this stuff, it seeps into, these other areas that are more like, influential in people's lives. Like, yeah, like maybe 30% haircut on like NASDAQ is like pretty bad, right? But, once that starts seeping into like, borrow lend markets or like consumer spending, right? And like some of these like more, middle class or lower class families in the US start to get affected, like that's when things change. You don't really have like 30-year mortgages like 2x in like 3 months without like some really negative consequences, right? Like people have, money and value for sure. But it's like the rate of change is like pretty remarkable. There's a chart that showed like how fast we've dropped relative to like other, like recessions that we had or depressions that we've had. And like we're literally at the same pace as we were in 2008. So it kind of just shows us like how fast this is kind of all happening. And that was like, quote, potentially the worst, like, economic period in maybe like 80 years before then, right? So it's just like, it's pretty unprecedented. The Fed has a playbook that's like much better. Global like treasuries have a lot better playbook, right? Like, so all to say like it, the pace of this stuff is pretty alarming. And I think like it affects a lot more people than we think, in terms of thinking about like why, asset values matter.
Well, before we wrap up here, reporting live from Goblin Town, I want to get both of your opinions on what is the best path forward for the people listening. And I imagine there's some people that we just mentioned that joined in 2020 or 2021. They've been watching this and saying, it's all over. Like, it's actually over. I joined for one cycle. I can't believe I did it. And there's also some people back from 2016, 2017 that have seen this a couple times. They're trying to somehow time the bottom. Maybe they're chopping themselves up. What is the best advice you have going forward? We all have goldfish memories. We all over-index to previous cycles. But is there anything that's actually helpful to think about right now as you kind of navigate for the next 3-6 months? Like, what should people be doing? We have half a year left. What's the best play here?
I think the biggest thing, like part of this is like crypto has like just generally gone up, right? So like this like has always sort of been like true, but like two things. Like one, everyone's got to go through a certain amount of pain. It's just part of the game. Like it has to happen. So like you're not unique. That's just like what happens. The second thing is like you kind of just like can't get disinterested and quit just because like you're like angry about like sort of like the path that sort of it took on you. Like that's like sort of like the decision that people have made historically that's like really just like bodied them, because they're like, all right, I'm over, I'm out of it. And like and like that's sort of like been the worst like case of it. So like find a way to keep yourself like interested in it, and like also realize that like you're not going through anything unique, and like it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just thinking about, there's always another trade, there's always another investment. Things keep growing, we're moving forward, we're not really moving backwards, hopefully. And I think like that is like the single largest piece of advice that I still have to remind myself, right? It's just like, thinking about, oh, I should have sold 60K is not really helpful, right? And instead of breaking it down, like, why didn't I sell? Or like, why would that be like an interesting spot to sell in the future is much more interesting. So I think just thinking about it in a lens of like, what's happened, and like I have the ability to act now, right? And not really beating yourself up over like what's happened in the past. And I remember, there's like I'll be honest, like there's been a lot of points in this market where I've been way more conservative than the average person in like 2021, right? Like whether it was like the Solana AVAX rotation or like, long tail alts or whatever you want to call them. I've been way more conservative on them. But it helps in points in the market like this where it's like, okay, like now that the dust has settled and like a lot of value has been destroyed, it's like, what can I do? What's interesting? I think a lot of people like to like, coast both at like the all-time highs and then like at the bottoms too. And like, while we don't really know that this is going to be like that structural bottom, it's pretty good to think about like what exactly is valuable in crypto. Where are people still working, right? Like, it's a very interesting spot for myself too, because I joined Ledger Prime like 3-4 weeks ago, and it was like literally like at more or less like after a nuclear wipeout, right? Like, and like I'm kind of looking around and I'm like, what is really valuable still? And it's like quite hard, right, to figure out like what is something that I can think about that is interesting. And so know that no one else really has it that much easier. Like the largest of funds are also in the same boat. Like you see Tiger and Co2 and all these groups like pretty consistently de-risking or selling or whatever. Like it's a hard game all around. And there's no secret sauce. It's just like resilience and like staying around long enough and you'll just win.
I'm just realizing before I actually sign off and hit end on the recording, Dan, your kitchen has to be on fire right now. Did you turn the oven off, dude?
Oh, yeah. I think it could run for a while. My kitchen, my stove has Wi-Fi. I don't know why.
What? What can you do with the Wi-Fi stove?
Dude, he needs to sell this and buy Bitcoin.
Damn, dude, you sold 60K, didn't you?
Yeah, he did. Look at him. He's smiling through his teeth.
I didn't sell enough. No, I don't know what the microwave does too. It's like I guess like if you wanted to turn the oven on before you got home, I guess. I've never done it, so I don't understand like why it has this.
Microwave, I guess you turn it off before the beep comes. I mean, what's the...
Like, how long are you microwaving something for?
That's what I'm saying.
Like 2 minutes? Like why do you need that like remote access? I don't know, but they both are hooked up. I didn't hook them up, but they have the capability. Yeah, this is a thing.
That's a thing.
It's for maximum Twitter scrolling. In between,
I don't have like
in between shit posts. Yeah,
I guess you could like put dinner in it, and then like you could start it
on your way home. Yeah,
this sounds dangerous.
It does sound dangerous. Well, for everyone listening, we gave you some alpha. We also gave you a new ramen flavor to check out, shrimp. If anyone listening does check that out, please let me know. I'm not going to do that. That's a little bit too bold for me. And if you do sell the top next cycle, now you have something to buy: Wi-Fi, microwave, and oven. Dan, I appreciate that as well. Thank you guys.
No worries.
Thank you guys both for coming on, man. We'll see if we can survive, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks.